All right. Come on in the room. It's a taking the stage takeover, y'all. Oh, and there is my fabulous friend and co-host. Let me let her in. This quote.
Hey.
Hey, friend.
Hey. Hi. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. I heard you say, Christian, this is a taking the stage takeover. So we are taking over today, Thursday.
That's my camera just a tiny bit. All right.
Yeah.
Mr. Jamil, I'm ready for my close up.
Nice. As always, we do a check-in. So as you're coming into this space, welcome. Welcome to today's conversation. Please let us know where you are. Let us know how you are doing. This is also a part of the holistic check-in that we've started to do at the Dallas Opera. So all of the practices and all of the beautiful things that we're experiencing, even though sometimes they're difficult, we want to make sure that we share that with the rest of the field, that we share that with our colleagues, that we share that with artists, with administrators, with people who make this work move forward and make it meaningful. So all that to say, drop your location.
Tell us how you're doing.
And let us know how you're feeling, how you're doing. I feel like I'm under shadow today.
Yeah, it's weird. My lighting is weird today too, but the weather has been weird, y'all. Texas is getting so much rain right now, especially I can't speak for the rest of my fellow Texans, but in the DFW area, wow. Um, raining,
Mhm.
flood warnings, all kinds of stuff. So lots and lots of rain. Literally, trying to dodge raindrops down here. Yeah.
Welcome, welcome into the
Yeah.
space.
Tell us where you're from, location, how you're doing. What's the weather like where you are?
And as we prepare for today's episode, so you all know the name of today's episode is Critical Human Facts. So as we have a conversation and as we are in conversation with one another, please feel free to add your questions, add your comments, add your experiences, because that is a part of the ways in which we break down the barriers, the ways in which we acknowledge the intersectionality between our experiences as well as our identities, but the ways that we acknowledge how opera and how art intersects with everything else that we do in life. So we're not in a vacuum, as Christian says so often. Opera, art does not happen in a vacuum, and everything that we do is influenced by other things that we experience and vice versa, right? What we do experiences or influences other experiences. So we want to be honest about that. We want to be truthful about that. We want to own it, and then we want to move forward through it.
Indeed. All right, we've held the house for our normal five. So, my name is Christian Roberts. I'm here with my fabulous friend and co-host,
Quo Decia Johnson.
and of course, we are back with a live episode of Taking the Stage with Christian
And Quo. And of course, as we start every single episode, as we start every single gathering, we do this because it is important in the work that we do. We do this because it is important in how we connect, how we move forward together. We do this because it is important in how we continue to honor our own stories, our own experiences, but the stories and the experiences of those who've come before us. So I ask that you join me in our land and people acknowledgement. I do want to take the time right here, right now, to acknowledge that we in Dallas are on stolen land. We are on the land of the Caddo, of the Wichita, and of the Comanche sovereign nations, nations that lived a full human experience, that loved, that lost, that fought, that grew, that cultivated the land since time immemorial. Nations that also faced horrible conditions, including genocide and including policy that allowed for the forceful removal from their land by any means necessary. The land was not ceded, it was taken. So we do want to uplift the truth in that. We also want to uplift the fact that those nations, those people, these beautiful stories are still here. They're here, they are thriving, and they should be uplifted, and we should all gather in uplifting them. I also want to take the time to acknowledge that people were stolen from their homes and brought here to Dallas and forced into free and enslaved labor. And from that free and enslaved labor, we now have what we enjoy as Dallas. But Dallas is not alone in this, as the entire nation benefits from stolen land and stolen labor. These are part of the stories that we carry with us. As you can tell, my last name is Johnson, not because my ancestors' name was Johnson. Same for Miss Roberts here. So that's a part of the stories that we take with us, that we carry with us, but also part of the beautiful ways that we start to redefine our own identities, that we start to take control of our own narratives, that we start to heal the harm and move this work forward together. So I thank you for joining me and us for this land and people acknowledgement.
And we thank you for joining us for this episode today. You always are coming through for us, the support, the continued support, the coming back and the learning space that we try to provide here and the resource that we try to provide here. It's very much appreciated. We can feel your support. We can feel your love. So thank you so much. And even when we tackle difficult subjects, we also welcome those folks who might be disagreeable with that as well, because it is all a part of having a conversation about the tough topics. So let's get, I also want to make sure I give a shout out to the Dallas Opera staff, of course, our leadership, and of course, our very dear friend, David Lomeli.
Hey, David.
We know that TDO Network was his brainchild, so we want to say hello to him as always, and we hope you are doing well, my friend. So let's dive into to today's topic, because we have seen some things come to light. Well, it hasn't come to light for some of us, but for many of us, there has been a reckoning over the past 16 months in so many different ways. And one of the things that has been that I touched on in last week's episode that we talked about a little bit, there's a very dangerous position we find ourselves in right now. And Quo so aptly named this episode Critical Human Facts. And one of the things we want to talk about is the danger of dismissing truth and dismissing facts, as if we haven't had enough evidence,
right,
from other things. I want to talk about this in terms of historical context, in terms of what the implications are now for that, and what it means for a future if we don't continue to try to move in truth and to move in connection, as we have tried to emphasize on this particular show over the past year or so. So I think the first thing that I want to get into, Quo, because we talk about all the time on this show, is narrative. The narratives. The
narrative, yes.
Incomplete narratives, the erasure of narratives, the deliberate leaving out of certain narratives. Let's dive into that a little bit, because there are systems that have been put in place that have done this on purpose.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this real quick. What are your thoughts on this? Because we've been talking about this week. So let's go ahead and dive on in with that first point.
And so, as Kristian mentioned, the name of today's episode is Critical Human Facts. And of course, that is a direct call to critical race theory, which is something that is being presented on a national scale right now as a threat to our nation, as a threat to our society. So what we wanted to do is have a conversation where we kind of break this down and what this means and what the implications of dismissing truth or dismissing facts, what that does for us as a society as we see it happening now and as we're witnessing it happen now. So as we look at narratives, we're realizing, and we have been realizing, that we don't have a full narrative. We have not had the opportunity to hear how other people are living. We have not had the opportunity to hear the full story, to hear and see how others have participated in such historical events that have taken place in shaping this nation. So many people were surprised. I didn't know. Juneteenth, I didn't know. I didn't know about these things. Tulsa, I didn't know. I didn't know about these things. The summer of 1919, I didn't know about these things. The fact that we're on stolen land, the fact that there were boarding schools and all these things for erasure. People are confessing, right, that they do not know. And it comes from a very deliberate place. It comes from a very deliberate place of denial, of erasure, of fear, of wanting to protect one's own comfort, which is natural. The issue comes in when it is unchecked. It starts to create this false reality. It starts to create this cognitive dissonance in what is truly happening and what we've learned. So as we're looking at this and the dangers of dismissing facts, we're looking at critical human facts. It is a fact. We are on stolen land. It is a fact. People were stolen from their homes. They were stolen. Not slaves were stolen. People were stolen. Parents were stolen. Doctors were stolen. Philosophers were stolen. People were stolen and dehumanized. That is a fact. The Constitution says that people are not people. Not everyone receives the same benefit. Not everyone receives the same value as a person. That is a fact. So as we're looking at the ways that the human facts have been presented, we have to move beyond the process of theoretical approach to how we start to solve these issues so that we can actually build on facts. It is a fact that we need to know the truth. It is a fact that we need to uplift the truth. It is a fact that opera is not exempt from these systems of oppression. It is not exempt from the barriers to access and to create, to evaluate, and then to start to share the art form itself. So these are facts. We're no longer are we in a space where we're trying to prove it. These are facts. And so as we look at these facts, what we also wanted to do is provide the examples of what happens when we choose not to face the facts or when we choose to dismiss part of the truth for our own comfort. This week definitely has been woven with celebrations, with acknowledgement, with pain, with understanding in the centennial of the Tulsa Massacre. And in this, as we're looking at what it meant for a community, a thriving community, to still not be protected from the violence of race, from the violence
from a lie,
from the violence of the construct of race, from the violence of a false hierarchy based on racial identities. People were thriving. Black communities, a Black community was thriving. And out of anger, out of privilege, out of unchecked fear and destruction, the whole community lay in rubble, burning, people missing. If they could go to a hospital, they would not have been able to go to any hospital except the Black hospital, right? And just what it looks like for this to be true. This is a fact. This happened. An entire community was attacked, not by outside entities, but attacked from people from across the railroad track. Mm-hmm. Attacked by white people from across the railroad track. Not just anybody.
It was in the same city, same town.
In the same. And so, and even if
by the government, bombed,
and by the police officers who assisted, right? And so, as we had a conversation with Brian Larney not too long ago, in the fall, and how he also shared that within that community there were also Native American and American Indian establishments working together with the Black community, right? And so, as we start to look at the ways that this construct is violence and has exhibited violence and has navigated and orchestrated violence towards so many different communities, we have to understand it also comes from a place of people not knowing. This is not to dismiss anything that happened. This is, we do not know the full story because people are not telling the full story, or people are hiding and covering up things, which is what is happening right now, even with the critical race theory. as opposed to actually addressing the issue, we are dismissing it. And so you will have a lot of people in the future, as it is now, saying, oh, I didn't know. I didn't learn about those things. I didn't learn about those things. That was not a part of my education. And what that really says is that was not a part of how I started to shape my worldview.
And there's the danger. We're repeating what has happened before, but right now, instead of a go behind the scenes and do it quietly, write it into law, uh, um, depend on people's ignorance of a new type of law, a system of law and governance. We're just flat out doing it right out in the open and saying that because it hurts people's feelings. And when I sit with colleagues who are my age or older, I've heard from every age from the 20s to up into the 60s and 70s, some toward their 80s, who never knew about Tulsa. And that's what sparked this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've heard about Tulsa since I hit the double digits, since I was 11 or 12.
Yeah.
But there's some people that are my Black friends that have said that they didn't know till they were in their 30s. They didn't know till they were, in their 20s. Or this one woman told me she wasn't into her 40s. People, this is a problem.
Yeah.
Because this is how history repeats itself. And so when you are deliberately removing things or passing laws or putting restrictions on how somebody should approach the teaching of a full narrative, this is why we always say question the narrative. Question what you have been taught. Because right now there's a blatant push to erase. Because it's too hard, or it divides us. As if what we've been doing up until this point hasn't been dividing us.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and that was something that I often ran into at the beginning, in the beginning stages of this equity work and in the beginning stages of the belonging work, is that these types of conversations are more divisive than they are productive. Yep. And I encourage everyone to, again, look at the facts. We are not as communal. We are not as together. We are not on the same page. We do not all receive the same benefits. We are already divided. We're divided by the silencing that happens from those who are more comfortable against those who need to speak the truth and how they are living their lives. So your ability to be comfortable and your comfort is not a measurement of whether or not we are divisive. Your own comfort is not a measurement of whether or not we are a collective, whether or not we are together, whether or not we're unified. That just means that you most likely have more privilege than others, and those that need to speak up and need to speak the truth about how they're living their lives and their experiences are being silenced. So do not accept silence as unity. Do not accept conversations about truth that are uncomfortable as being divisive, because that is also a form of the supremacy culture that says that everybody needs to get along in order to go along. We can't get along until we actually start to have conversations about what has happened, what is happening, and until we have shared value and what we want to do going forward. Yeah. So I hear this so often, it's like, oh, to create a divide with the students and all these things. No. What it will do is allow people to actually start to carry some of the weight that has already been placed on a lot of different identities in different ways. And I also extend this into the dangers of what this means if we're not upholding the full narrative, what this means for the opera field. Yes. When you look up and you have entire generations of people who say, oh, I didn't know this person was a part of the opera. I didn't know this person composed this. Oh, I didn't know that we did opera. I did not know that this group participated in this work. When we have false narratives, when we have incomplete narratives, when we have narratives that dismiss identities, we start to embrace and we start to uplift and we start to perpetuate an incomplete story, which means that we're perpetuating an incomplete art form. We're perpetuating an incomplete connection or false connection to the art form as well. It's okay for us to know the truth. It is okay for us to put down the weight of it's our fault and we did it because we did not. These are things we've inherited, just like we do in our land and people acknowledgement. We've inherited those things. We did not create them, but it's also okay for us to pick up the weight and the responsibility of saying no more. And this is what we would do going forward. That's the biggest thing I always try to get everybody to kind of get past that first barrier of, oh no, defense.
Yeah.
This is not what I was taught, and get to, okay, I don't know everything. There's so much more to learn. What do we do going forward?
Yeah, and the fact that when you do learn something or you do take a class or you do sit through a conversation, it does not equal you being an expert. What it does is what you need to understand is this is a process of longevity. This is going to take time. This is a commitment. It's a lifelong commitment to looking at things from different perspectives, to hearing things from different perspectives, and then to together utilize those things to create the kind of product, whether that's artistic, the fundraising model, whatever it is that you want to do
Mhm.
in the organization. This is how you do it. We say all the time, we talk about, diversity, but we're talking about diversity of thought and of background, not just color. Okay, because it doesn't matter if you bring people into your organizations of different races and skin color, if you're integrating them into an environment that's not conducive to their ideas being
Yeah.
truly listened to, all right,
And
and truly inclusive, and if there's no sense of belonging.
yeah.
And this is the danger. This is the danger of saying we all can just come together in the
We
classroom
all
and learn
belong
this
here.
one narrative,
No,
and
we
we'll
don't.
highlight Rosa Parks and we'll highlight MLK, we'll highlight, but we don't want to talk. And folks, let me be very clear. The history of the United States is a painful one.
Mm-hmm.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of uncomfortable stuff here. Okay, there's a lot of stuff that we have to face that is not pretty within our own communities, within our own backyards, everything nationally. What we've done on an international scale. Well, how are we ever going to do anything about it and really truly move forward together if we're banning talking about it or teaching anything about it? How
Yeah.
is a teacher supposed to stand in front of the classroom and now talk about segregation and the implications of that? There was just 215 children's bodies unearthed from a residential school in Canada.
Yeah.
We're not going to talk about that?
Yeah.
Those are children.
Yeah.
It is a disservice in a world that is looking more diverse, more mixed every single day. And I'm not, again, not just talking about race here. I'm talking about the absolute mixing of culture and identity and
And
everything,
experiences and roles
experiences,
and
stories,
expression.
background, religions, everything. It is a disservice not to prepare somebody for a world like that.
And it is a disservice to rob people of the connections that they can have with other
Yes,
individuals who have
and
different experiences from their
the
own.
relationships that can be built out of that.
Yeah.
And as somebody, as an artist, we know this. When we take on different characters, when we take on different experience, we're taking on a character that we know nothing about. It is crucial that we study that role and we study the performance practice around it, and we study the all the different types of things, or we study the culture. We make sure we get the language right. We make sure we do all those
Yeah.
things. That same meticulous attitude needs to be taken when we approach our society, because anything that's happening in society is going to seep into our opera bubble. And see, we get so caught up in the beauty of the art, right? And the art is beautiful. We're not knocking
Mhm.
that. We wouldn't be sitting here if we didn't think the art was beautiful. We didn't think the work was beautiful. All right. What we put on stage is beautiful. But that same meticulous energy we take when we are trying to make sure we get the best product that we can, that same energy needs to be the same way in forming relationships. It needs to be in our budgets. It needs to be in our fundraising models. It needs to be in our boardrooms. It needs to be in our rehearsal rooms. It needs to be in our classrooms. And that's at primary and secondary level. It has to be there.
Mhm.
And if you don't believe me, again, not knocking the education that I got, but a history of Western music, the Norton Anthology.
Yeah.
many of us can relate to not seeing much of ourselves in there. So we had to go out and explore.
Or seeing the root of where so many instruments stem, or
Yes,
seeing the complete narrative. Just like in the United States, so much of our narratives, depending on our identities, start with some sort of struggle.
yes,
Truly. Oh, those people were not identified. Those people were not acknowledged. This group, this particular part of an identity was not really acknowledged until somebody had to pass an act. I'm
yes.
looking at like
Or an
the
amendment.
Disabilities Act of 1990. Like, oh, we didn't start really, really paying attention, even though people have lived with these experiences the entire time for the span of humanity. Things do not become real because you suddenly acknowledge it. Things do not become false because you suddenly deny it. And so, as we look at what it means for our organizations to start to embrace this and to take this on, we also, Kristian, you mentioned it, we also have to understand that our learning does not make us an expert.
No.
It may make us an expert in observation. It may make us an expert in secondary and tertiary interpretation of things, but our learnings will never make us an expert. So we have to be committed to being in spaces where we are continuously learning, where we are continuously shifting how we prioritize voices and how we prioritize the work that we are doing, so that we get used to being in a space where, again, there are certain spaces where I should not be leading a conversation. I can uplift, I can help shape, I can help frame, I can help facilitate, but my voice should not be centered. And it shouldn't be centered just because you want a diverse voice. No, why are we here? What are we talking about? What experience do we want to speak to the most? And in the most authentic manner, where is the individuals, the group? Where is the representation for that? And then how do we uplift those individuals, those groups, those experiences without making that particular entity the spokesperson for everybody with that identity? It's very complex.
Yes.
It's not something that we can just fold in. It's not something that we can be like, oh, we've been doing it this way. Let's just add this little part about equity. Again, equity requires disruption. You're going to have to change the way that we do things. But I assure you, when we get into a space where we're okay with being uncomfortable, where we're okay with acknowledging that's not what I learned, but I want to hear more. That's not what I learned, but now I see that I'm missing some pieces. Let me start to connect the dots. And I'm willing to remain in this conversation. I'm willing to remain in this journey with you so that I get a full journey of what we're doing. That's the space we want to be in. That's the space that's meaningful. That is the space that's going to require that we move ourselves out of the way so that we can actually uplift truth. As we're looking at the ways in which the field is starting again, we're going back into the house, we're going back on stage. We've had all these conversations. No longer do we want to talk about oppression. We don't want to talk about these things anymore, which is okay when it comes from the human need to be comfortable. It is not okay when it comes from people who are committed to making sure there's a change, because things have not changed. Things have started to change. It nudged just enough, but a nudge is not what we're looking for. We are dismantling, we are disrupting, we are replacing. So to nudge things along and say, oh, well, now we are considerate of this group when we are on stage, but we completely deny the existence of the other group. Or we'd rather not have those conversations because they're uncomfortable. It places us in a very dangerous situation, just as a field, but as a society, just as human beings. So that's my call to action on that and what this looks like. It's real. It's a fact. It is a fact. You cannot deny truth just to make things better, because that does not work. It's not how this works.
Well, and the other thing is that we're not saying that this is going to happen overnight. We didn't get here overnight. We also say that there has to be some sort of movement forward. And I'm going to try to say this in the most polite way that I can.
We say
you don't get to decide. You do not get to decide what is the proper progression of speed.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, if you're not the person being affected by the system.
Nor do you get to measure success And I see so often, especially as we're talking with general directors, and not to diss our general directors, but right now, a lot of our general directors share the same or share similar identities, share very similar identities, or any group that shares a similar identity. You don't get to measure whether or not we've made progress in racial justice. You don't get to measure whether or not a group who's not a part of the LGBTQ plus, it's Pride Month, right? LGBTQ plus community, you don't get to measure whether or not we've made progress or that we've started to actually acknowledge people's humanity with this particular group or with this particular community if you're not a part of the community. You cannot from the outside looking in saying, oh, we're doing much better, when people in the inside are still saying no, or people still on the outside trying to get in saying, no, 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 it's not enough, right? We've said it before that celebration should be measured by the celebrated. Service should be measured by the served. And you cannot yourself say, oh, no, it's not a problem anymore if you yourself never really experienced a problem to begin with. Or if you're just learning about the problem, which a lot of people are just learning about so many issues, which is okay. We welcome you into this journey. There is a place for you as we share this space. And that place is not at the front all the time.
No. And I think that's one of the hardest pills for people to swallow, is that once they absorb some knowledge, particularly something like this, you feel the need to jump out ahead, or you feel the need to completely ignore and shut down. And that's not the way to do it. Because the thing is that if you think it's not easy for you and you're uncomfortable, imagine the people that have to live it all the time.
Yeah.
You know, imagine our Asian brothers and sisters right now who are terrified right now to walk out of their,
to walk outside.
You know, imagine our LGBTQ folks that are sitting here and very concerned about not being treated like human beings. What
And then imagine the people who, because of their identity, people assume that they already have a space in opera, but who never truly connected with opera, who had horrible experiences. And so now they're carrying this false dichotomy of, oh, you look this way or you have this income, you must love opera, as opposed to, I was actually never really welcomed into the space, or I did not have the best experience when I was in the space, or the stories don't speak to me. We are leaving so many people out, and it is not always deliberate. It comes from a deliberate space outside of our intentions. But as we start to look at it, we do have to be deliberate about how we are starting to embrace humanity. These are human facts. We are all human beings. That is not to dismiss the fact that we have very real differences in how we walk through the world, because we do. It is our opportunity to say, okay, what are those differences? And of those differences, how do we start to uplift and celebrate them, as opposed to silence, as opposed to erase, and as opposed to demonizing people because of them, as opposed to being violent toward one another because of them, as opposed to erasing the truth so that I can feel more comfortable. Kind of like that, oh, I don't see color. Oh, we're all together. There is one race. Absolutely, there's one race. Everybody's not being treated the same way, for things that are outside of their control. So as we're looking at this and what our organizations need to do and going forward, there's an accountability that we must have in how we're treating our artists, and how we're treating our audiences, and how we're treating our communities, and how we're treating our staff, and how we're treating ourselves as well, right? It starts with such an internal place that it extends. And don't get me wrong, this is still a business. We have a business to run. Our businesses will run better if we stop the nonsense.
And treat people as people.
People.
It's really, as a human being who is allowed to be on this earth and exist on the earth and breathe on this earth. I don't understand what's so hard about that. But when you put a system in place that tells somebody that they're lesser than, and then a system that continues and deliberately leaves out folks, and therefore are by default considered lesser than, what do you think is going to happen? And this is exactly what's happening here. And stop.
We can.
Like Quo says, stop these things. Stop these things. It's got to stop. And the scary thing is, I say again, is when you start messing with the innocence on this, You're not going to tell children the truth. And one of these days, we'll bring up episodes on how children are treated in society, but we won't get on that right now. But it's a disservice, and it is not equipping them with what they need. And how is that any different than any other kind of discriminatory practice
Yeah.
that many of us have been speaking out against? It is a disservice. We have a responsibility to make sure, if you're going to have a public school system, then they need to learn about the public. They need to learn about the people. They need to learn about who they're going to be engaging with in their life, not just at their age, in life.
Yeah.
And what I love about this art form is the way in which we approach the music and the way we approach the learning of things and the studying of roles and the studying of scores and all this kind of stuff that we know to do can be applied to this. We just have to remember the creative folks that we are and try to build a world that we haven't seen before.
Mm-hmm.
But we have the tools.
We have the tools.
We have the tools to do it. We bring scores to life that have never been done before with world premieres and stuff all the time. So this should be the same way, but we cannot do that if we don't have the material to do it. Suppose the composer says, okay, I want y'all to put on my opera, but you don't get a score. That's exactly what you do when you snatch away truth away from somebody, when you snatch away the facts. Or they say, oh, I'll give you the score, but all the staffs are going to be empty. No notes. When you give somebody half of something, half the tool that they need to be able to move and properly produce that work. That's what you do when you ill-equip society for things. That's what you do when you hold back resources. That's what you do when you hoard resources. Yeah. That's what happens. Not making it up. One only needs to look at stuff that's bubbling up. And I think that's what's so frightening for a lot of people right now, Quo, especially with this movement that's going on, right? This backlash of, and here's the crazy thing, the critical race theory and the teaching of racism and all this stuff, it wasn't being taught in classrooms anyway. At least not in a bunch of the curriculum that I've seen. And the people had the nerve to try to introduce elements of it. Now you're telling them that they can.
Yeah. But that's how we get to, oh, I did not know. And because I did not know, I did not consider how your experiences and your history, or the history of your experiences and what that means, shape how you walk through this world. It's it's very telling when we're in spaces where, again, and this is something we all have to learn, that our own experiences are not the same experiences as everyone else. Our own experiences are not the epitome or not the pinnacle of how people will experience opera, how people will experience being in certain spaces together. It takes so much for us to realize that we are not the only people on the planet. We realize that, but then to extend that into our experiences are not the only ones. But that's how this world starts to open up in such a beautiful way. That's how this art form starts to open up in such a beautiful way. Because then we get to learn about others, but then we get to share space with others. We get to complete the narrative. But if we're not given the complete narrative, and if our arts organizations are not committed to providing a complete narrative, then we do a disservice to everyone in the space. And we've talked about what is happening in the public school system, which we all have a responsibility to participate in, of course, but in what our arts organizations can do and the responsibility that we have, especially as opera organizations or as artists, as administrators, as lovers of this art form, it comes in layers. It comes in making sure that, one, we acknowledge human facts. We have to acknowledge the facts, not because we need to, but because we should. Not because we want to upset someone, but because people's comfort does not outweigh or take priority over the truth. Simply a form of truth telling. Again, let go of the weight that you created this because you did not. Pick up the weight of whether or not you will sustain it or whether or not you will disrupt it. That's the weight that we carry now. And so as we look at this, it is important that arts organizations start to practice truth telling. We start with the land and people acknowledgement. Whose land are you on? Because you're on somebody's land. Whose land are you on? In your state, what did the slave trade do for that state? And not directly, because not every state was a slave state, but again, the entire nation benefits from an economy that does not want to pay what it owes. So, as we look at these things, what other things are taking place in your communities? Where are your communities and the different identities in those communities? What are your PTAs doing, right? As we also look at that,
Mhm.
in what ways can you start to make sure that opera has its place within your community? Not as the highest art form and as the
The
culmination of all
epitome
arts.
of artistic excellence, and
Not as
no.
that, but as just this really cool tool that brings all art together and can bring all people together because of the stories that we tell and because of the stories that we have the ability to tell, because of the honor of the stories that we carry forward and that we can carry forward. That is the way we want everybody to start to carry together. And so as we're looking at this, as you're looking at your land and people acknowledgments, as you are looking at your communities, as you're looking at holistic identity, also start to look at the stories that you're telling. And not so that you can have a conversation about whether or not Porgy and Bess is problematic, but so that you can truly have a conversation so that you can hear why people are saying it is problematic. And then so that you can, and this is an example, Porgy and Bess is an example, but why you can start to look at ways to reshape, to reframe, to address those issues, but then to ensure that there are other opportunities for people to experience more.
Mhm.
There are things that we can do. We cannot use the same approaches that we've had before. We have to acknowledge that things have been left out. We have to acknowledge that there is a danger in clinging to things that have been left out or clinging to incomplete things as complete entities. The
Yeah.
narrative is not complete. Experiences are not complete. Our knowledge is not complete. It may never be complete, but we have to move toward truth. We have to move toward human facts. We have to move toward the fact that not everybody accesses this art form the same way, but they should be able to access it in some way.
Yep.
And we have an obligation to our communities. We have an obligation to the art form as well, speaking as an artist, to make sure that this is all that it can be, because it can be something truly amazing. That's
And
my
we have the
second point.
tools. That's your no, it
That's my
was all
second
good
point.
points because we have the ability and the capability to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Like this, we literally bring together all of art forms, visual, drama, I mean, the whole dance, singing, okay, instruments. We bring them all together. We bring them all together. So it's not like we know how to put complicated things together. We
Mm-hmm.
know how to address complicated things. We do it all the time. And so why should this not be a part of it? Why should not addressing the whole human being, the whole artist, the whole arts administrator? You know what I mean? The whole stage crew member, the whole, you know
Yes.
what I mean? The whole wardrobe, the whole, you know what I mean? Like it should be a part of it because the bottom line is that this work starts within.
Yeah.
And while I've seen some beautiful things over the past, 15 or 16 months, some things happening, I feel like there is a dipping back right now. And I'm
Yeah.
like, no, this is the point where we should be leaning in
And
because
we are
this
not
is where,
done.
no, we are not done. This is where we lean into the test. You know what I mean? This is where we lean in. This is where the application of the things that we have learned start. And I'm going to say again, we're not going to get it all right.
Right.
Okay. Quo and I are not going to get it all right. TDO is not going to get it all right all the time. I mean, our colleagues across the world, I won't call out specific companies because I don't need y'all yelling at me, saying I called you because I'm not trying to do that. What I'm saying is that we're not all going to get it right all the time. But the point is just for us to, if we don't get it right, to say, oh, we fumbled that one. Okay, how are we going to pick the ball back up, okay, and get it into the end zone right this time?
Mhm.
How are we going to do it? What are we going to do to correct that? And that is how we move forward. So often people will, drop the ball or something like that and go,
I'm done and back
I'm
away.
done. And this
Or
can
get defensive and say that it was your fault to begin with.
or say it was your fault because you shouldn't have threw it that hard. You
Yeah.
shouldn't have existed.
That's being
No,
human.
no, hold up. You shouldn't have existed on the football field in the first place.
Who told you you could come out here? You the one that has to be out here.
Exactly. Exactly. So, and that's what we're saying. All right. But I will also say this, that this it's going to be difficult. Okay. But it's all right,
It's okay.
because we are used to dealing with difficult things.
Yes.
We have sustained an art form that is over 400 years old. Okay. We can do this too.
Yes. Yes. And so as we're looking at this, right, as the name of this episode is Critical Human Facts. And it is a critical human facts that we are a communal species. Let's go with that. We have to be in community with each other, just as a whole, just as within our existence. It is a fact that silencing people, silencing truth never truly works out, right? It's not best. It's not what works for people. It's not. It is a fact that this art form brings together a lot of different art forms. It is a fact that this art form requires people in order for it to exist. It is a fact that what we're doing in our opera organizations and in our companies requires an audience, requires a community, requires some sort of appreciation or some sort of connection to exist. It is a fact, it is a human fact that we go into spaces that are comfortable for us. We default to trying to make sure that we protect our own comfort. But it's also a fact that we cannot be comfortable all the time. So we cannot, because then we do not grow, we do not learn, we do not adapt. We do not start to move forward and move everything in a way that allows for us to become better, to become more stable. So as we're looking at this, I'm encouraging everyone. Are these my positive notes? Am I positive
Yes,
notes?
ma'am, they are. We're in
Positive notes,
positive.
right?
I was
I'm
I
encouraging
was gonna
everyone
dive
to
us right
lean
into him. I
into.
was gonna lead us into him, but you were already there. So
Oh
yes,
yeah,
ma'am,
okay.
go.
As we look at this positive notes in critical human facts, human fact, you are creative. That is kind of what separates us from other animals. But human fact, you need other people. Human fact, we don't want to be in spaces where we are not uplifted as individuals, but we also cannot prioritize our own comfort over other people being able to simply be in the space and exist in the space. That requires that we shift, that it requires that we uplift truth, that requires that we also lean into learning, lean into understanding that we don't know everything. That's a fact. We do not know everything, but together we start to piece the missing parts together. Together we start to create a full narrative. So as we're going through this process, again, we always say take heart, but take heart in knowing that as a human being, you have the ability and the capacity to address difficult things. It requires practice. It requires continuous engagement. It requires community so that you know that the work that you're doing is not in vain. As we're looking at community, we have to make sure that we have all of the narratives and that we open space so that we can hear all the narratives. It's not enough to just say we don't want to learn about these things because it's uncomfortable.
You better get comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah, because we're uncomfortable, or this particular group that has been privileged is uncomfortable, because people will learn about it anyway. People are learning about things now. And it is better for us to understand, right? We'll go back to music theory. It's better for us to understand the foundation of things so that we can build on it, as opposed to trying to piece things together afterwards because we refuse to learn, or we were not given the opportunity to learn and grow with the knowledge. We have the ability to grow. We have the ability to adapt. We have the ability to create such amazing, wonderful things. Lean into that as a community. Take on the responsibility of seeking truth, of uplifting truth, of sharing space, and of changing the spaces that we're in. Because I guarantee you, we're not there. We are not done. But that's okay. That's part of the beautiful work that we get to do together. So with that, those are my positive notes. Stand on truth. Do not prioritize your comfort over truth, but do prioritize connection over fear. And then we'll be able to move this work forward together. So Kristian,
Right.
go for it.
Thank you, Quo. No, I agree with all of that wholeheartedly. Folks, we have the capability of doing things. And as I say all the time, as we wrap up, be bold.
Mm-hmm.
This requires you to be bold. This requires you to be brave. This requires you to be creative. This requires you to think about a world we've not yet seen, but we know we can do it.
Yeah.
We create and build worlds all the time,
All the time.
all the time. Digital stages, traditional stages, amphitheaters, on the backs of trucks. We know we can do it. All right. So we should do that and take those skills and that knowledge and apply them here. So take care of yourself, folks. Make sure you are resting radically during this time. Make sure you are drinking your water because summertime is coming. And also just make sure you are taking the time to take a breath, step back, and know that you are needed. Arts administrators, you are needed. Artists, you are needed. Audience members, patrons, donors, supporters, you are needed more now than ever. So thank you all very much for joining us today for our live episode of Taking the Stage with Kristian
and Quo.
Peace out, y'all.
Bye. See you later.
Later.